All right, so hello and welcome to the next edition of Fridays with Fintelekt. My name is Shirish Pathak. I head Fintelekt Advisory Services. And for those of you who don't know what we do, we are focused in the area of AML and CFT, that's anti-money laundering and countering terrorist financing. My guest today is Sandeep Mehra, CEO of the Academy of Fraud Investigations. Sandeep has over 32 years of experience in banking investigation and vigilance. He has worked with the Central Bureau of Investigation, where he was associated with investigating almost all the major Indian banking frauds and also the stock market scams of years 1992 as well as 2001. He was adjudged the best investigator of India by the government of India for investigating the stock market scam of 2001. And after leaving the government of India, he joined the Royal Bank of Scotland and later Citibank as their head of investigations and vigilance. So Sandeep, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shirish. Thanks for a very nice introduction. I'm really happy to be a part of this.
Thanks. So Sandeep, the growing number of NPAs or non-performing assets and fraud losses are actually a major cause of concern for banks, not just in India, but in other parts of the world as well. And with digitization of banking, we've seen that frauds are not limited to one country anymore. And even one big, fraud can actually bring the entire bank down. We have seen in the past, for example, frauds related to SWIFT hacks, which have actually made a big dent to the banking industry, especially in the South Asia region. But timely intervention and investigation have actually saved millions of dollars, which otherwise would have been lost. Now, we also know that banking regulators around the region have made it mandatory for all the commercial banks to identify the reasons for loss in their commercial accounts and also to identify if there's any diversion of funds or fraud. So with this backdrop, Sandeep, my first question to you would be, what do you think are the main areas of business within any bank which are most prone to frauds?
Well, Shirish, thanks for this question. If I share my experience with you, still what I see that if we see the trends and the statistics which the banks are providing as the main areas of frauds, they're still focusing on the area of debit credit card business. For instance, in a month or so, if I'm reporting 1,000 frauds within a particular bank, I think more than 990 cases would be related to credit debit card business. I agree that committing a fraud within debit credit card business is really very easy because the customers are still not very educated in this particular region. And they keep on sharing their personal information with the fraudsters. And with the advancement of dark web, these frauds are happening because the data is available on the dark web, and with the advancement of technology and everything, even the fraud tools are available which the fraudsters can purchase. I'm more, as you're rightly pointing out, I'm more concerned about the frauds which are happening in the, say, commercial business or the trades business markets or the wholesale business, as the banks call it. Because one such fraud within any bank can actually bring the entire bank down. And we have seen in the past as well, whether it was the Barings Bank case or the, say, the Wells Fargo case, or for instance, the stock market scams within India. We have seen that these cases have actually brought the banks down. And all these frauds happen in the, wholesale business or the trades business. So my concern is more in the, say, wholesale business activities, because you see that even the NPAs are growing in this area, which is a cause of concern for everybody.
Right. So, Sandeep, we do not see many frauds reported in, some of these areas. And, you rightly said that it could be that on the retail side, it could be that consumers are not very well educated or informed. But on the commercial side, it's only when some major scam sort of breaks out and we hear about it in the press, and then people start talking that this is going to bring the bank down. It's only when it comes to such a breaking point that we actually hear of it. So what is the reason for that, and why is it not caught sooner?
Well, if you see a working of any trades account or a wholesale account, the loans are sanctioned to the corporates, and they are allowed to do a business basis their liking or something like that. Now, these frauds do not happen overnight. I will give you an instance. Like, I mean, there have been, say, recessions, and there have been, like, in the present scenario also, when the companies are closed for such a long time, I'm pretty much sure that the diversion would have already started, but the banks would never have any way to find out that the diversion has started. Now, you see, supposing a businessman is issuing 100 checks in a month or 100 checks in a day, out of that, actually, if they are diverting amount with 2 checks, the bank has no way to find it out. It is only when a continuous monitoring of an account is happening, only then the bank would come to know that the systematic diversion is happening. Most of the times, it is only at the end when the bank would come to know that the fraud has happened, the diversion took place long ago. So this is the first reason. The second reason which comes to my mind, that I mean, the moment you report a fraud, there are so many other formalities which you need to complete, and that takes a lot of time of the bank, and they don't want to get themselves associated with that. Now, see, when you simply reporting a fraud as an NPA or non-performing asset, you can go for a civil suit, you can file a civil suit, and you can start the recovery procedures. However, when you report a case as a fraud, immediately you have to inform the regulator, you have to inform the law enforcement authorities, because they have to start their investigation. You yourself have to complete your internal investigation, and then only you are gone through, you're completing your processes. Not only that, when the law enforcement investigation begins, even the bankers are considered as accomplices, and the investigation starts from there only. And because most of the people, even in the law enforcement, actually, this knowledge about banking processes and all those things is not very clear. So maybe I think these are the two reasons which comes to my mind, which could be for non-reporting of these frauds.
Right. So, Sandeep, then what are your thoughts on the actual prevention side? How do you prevent some of these frauds? And how do you think that having a qualified team within the business and a good investigation team within the bank, how important is that? And are banks really following that?
You brought a very good, valid point initially, Shirish. You said that actually the banks are required to monitor all these accounts. The regulators across the region have made it mandatory, because the business team, or the relationship managers as we call within the business team, they are the closest ones who are with the any particular account. Periodically, if they are monitoring the accounts, so it becomes very difficult for the borrowers to divert the funds. Even as one instance, if they see that this could be a diversion, they can immediately call the borrower and ask for the reasons of that particular transaction. So yeah, a qualified business team is the key aspect of preventing these kind of frauds. Then comes the investigations team. Now, investigation teams will only come into picture when there is a fraud, or the account is turning. When the bank feels that the account is turning bad. Of course, because I have seen that the investigation teams within the bank also, they are also not much qualified to take up these kind of cases, because their major focus of investigation is in the retail banking environment, the debit credit card business, or some internal violations. That is what they investigate. Why only say investigation of the business team? To my mind, I think even the auditor is also should be equally qualified to identify these frauds.
Right. So, Sandeep, you mentioned that the role played by the business team. So, how important would you say is, let's say, the partnership between the business team and the internal investigations team, or any control functions within the banks?
Sirish, I have always maintained that whether it is the control functions, in fact, the investigation teams comes under the control function only, or the business, ultimately they are working for the same organization. So they should be thinking about the interests of the same organization. So the partnership has to be there. Within business also, if you see the front-facing business or the back office, like the way they work in partnership, the same case should be between the control functions as well. I have spent around 11 years with I think two major multinational banks, and my partnership with the business has always been really very well. And from experience, I can say that we have been able to prevent large number of frauds. And even when the frauds have happened, we have been able to recover the money after that. You are aware that Indian regulator has mandated this vigilance function within the banks. So by regulation also in India, it is mandatory for the banks to have a vigilance function, which is a contact between the business, the investigation team, and the regulator. So the vigilance head is supposed to be present in most of the business meetings. So they can get a first-hand information about any bad accounts or anything like that. And then they can refer the cases to their investigation team to help the business to either to recover the money or to prevent those kind of frauds.
Right. So, Sandeep, I think it's easier for bankers to maybe detect the funds diversion because, most of them are trained in risk management. But we also know that bankers are not investigators, right? So, when an investigation actually is going to happen later, so what would you suggest that, or how would you suggest that bankers should go about collecting knowledge, maybe which is used as evidence later, when they notice something funny happening? So do you have any advice to them on that side?
Well, Sirish, I have been training the banking teams and also the law enforcement officers for the last perhaps I think 12 to 13 years. And I agree with you, they are not investigators. I mean, the banking team is not investigators. So that knowledge has to be shared with them. Their main focus area is business development because that is the area which brings them the incentives. However, if you are able to prevent frauds early, so that should also be counted as a say incentive enriching thing for them. I think sharing this knowledge with the business teams is also really very important. We are not expecting them to be an investigator or something, but if they see any kind of activity, any kind of fund diversion or something, so immediately they should be putting a question to the borrower, and it should be investigated further.
Right. And what about the, let's say, internal investigators? I mean, can we make the bank's internal investigation team also, do their job better?
Yes, as I said earlier, most of the investigators are doing this investigation in the internal violation area or the retail banking investigations that they are performing. I have not seen much banks utilizing those investigators for their commercial banking activities or the personal banking activities or trades or something like that. And if you see, there are not much trainings also available to enrich these people on these kind of aspects. Most of the investigators lack knowledge about the processes around these businesses. So I think that is a challenge which everybody is facing as of now. Recently, I have launched 2 to 3 trainings for the law enforcement officers and also for the banking investigators, which people can go through. And I think I have tried to cover all these processes and aspects in a nutshell. And it is, I think, a 1-day training or 2 days training, which I think we can jointly conduct or something like that. I would be more than happy to help any of the businesses or any of the banks to enrich their knowledge on this.
Right. So, Sandeep, on the money recovery side, there has been a surge in civil recovery cases. Now we also know that in most countries it is quite difficult to recover money once it's lost, because even the bankruptcy laws are not very stringent. So, when you look at a trained investigation team, how do you think that in this scenario they should be actually adding more value?
Shirish, from experience, if I see, most of the bankers are terming these losses as business losses, right? As I said earlier, the teams are not able to identify diversion, because the moment you identify a diversion, that becomes a willful default. It is no at that moment it is not a normal say business loss or something. So when it becomes a willful default, it amounts to fraud. And now the teams have to be proactive on this. If they are able to identify at least one or two instances of a big diversion, so immediately they have to call a spade, and it has to be reported as fraud. Now the advantage for that is, in a civil recovery, it takes years to recover the money for any bank, and the litigation costs are so high that actually most of the banks even write off everything. In a criminal proceeding, the moment you declare it as a fraud, you will report it to the law enforcement. And when the law enforcement process starts, there is a sword hanging on the borrower that immediately he can be arrested. The forceful recoveries can start because of the attachment of properties and everything. And they sit across the table and start to negotiate with the businesses. In the past, in many such cases, with my experience with the say multinational banks, we have adopted this process, and I'm happy to share that we were able to recover millions in this way.
That's great, Sandeep. So, Sandeep, from all the experience that you've had over the years in investigation, what would your advice to investigation teams be that what are the steps they should take in really mastering some of the techniques, maybe let's say related to diversion of funds, which is something which you spoke about. How difficult is it to get all this knowledge and then actually implement it so that it becomes second nature to them?
Sirish, I have started with the one-day training for the beginners, just to test the grounds actually whether they're comfortable with these kind of say investigations or not. And I'm happy to share that there are a number of people who are subscribing to this kind of training, and they are finding it very useful. I mean, what I have done is actually I have shared a few techniques. What I'm expecting from the participant is a little bit of inquisitiveness. I will share with you those techniques and just see whether you are able to find a diversion or not. Once you are able to do it, you can go for the advanced training. And believe me, this is the future, because at this moment when we are most of the companies are closed for the last 3 to 4 months, it is world over. I'm pretty much sure that the diversion has already started in most of the accounts, and in most of the banks they would be declaring their NPAs really very soon now. So at this point in time, if you enrich your knowledge, if you are able to identify the diversion, you can actually help the business in say recovering the money, and you would nowhere be considered as a say expense to the bank or to the organization. When you're bringing in money for the bank, definitely your position will improve.
Right. Sandeep, it's been great having you here with us today, and thanks so much for your time. So, any parting thoughts for our listeners?
Yes, as I said earlier, I think the partnership with the business has to continue. And ultimately, we have to think that we are working for the same organization. Number two, this is the right moment. You need to identify diversion of funds. It is no more a bad account or a NPA. You cannot simply say that actually the bank is losing money because of this. If you are able to recover money for them, if you are able to identify the diversion, so that is definitely going to help your position and also your organization.
Right. Thanks, Sandeep, for all those thoughts. Listeners, thanks for joining the session today. We look forward to seeing you again next Friday. This is Shirish from Fintelekt signing out.